Ben Lake.
Oh, thank you, Mr Gates, and it is a pleasure to serve in your chairmanship. And can I also congratulate the Honourable Member for East Lothian for securing a debate on what is a matter of the highest importance for communities across the United Kingdom. West Wales, it should be said, was home to some of the first banking networks set up at the end of the 18th century to facilitate the booming trade of sheep and cattle and to allow Welsh drovers to safely deposit large sums of money on their way to and from London. Now, is it not tragically ironic, therefore, that we now face the situation wherein these very same rural communities, home to some of the earliest banking networks, could soon be deprived of any at all? And nowhere is this precariousness perhaps more apparent than in Ceredigion. The seaside towns of Aberera and New Quay have lost bank branches. The old market towns of Llandyston and Tregaron recently made headlines by becoming towns without any banks at all. And now the recent round of closures also sees larger towns in Ceredigion lose branches. It is important to note that beyond the impact that these recent decisions will have on Ceredigion and Lampeter, the consequences will also be doubly felt by some of the other towns in the county. For when they lost their own branches, the communities were told that they could visit the branches in Ceredigion and Lampeter instead. Now these branches are closing. I do not deny that the way in which people bank is changing, but I would argue that the way in which it is changing differs across the country, and this needs to be reflected, something that the Honourable Member for East Lothian mentioned in his comments. For many in rural areas, new and alternative ways of accessing banking services are simply not possible due to a lack of broadband, and as a consequence, online banking and card, let alone contactless payments, are a distant prospect for many. In rural areas also, the closure of a branch often requires transferring to another many, many miles away. This poses, of course, a particular problem for older people or those with poor mobility, and for those, again, living in rural communities where transport links are very few and far between. What's more, small business owners find themselves having to close shop to travel 20, 30 odd miles one way to their nearest branch, merely to bank their takings. It is just not sustainable for many small businesses to close for an afternoon or a day just in order to travel to the nearest bank. Now, I'm conscious of the time, so I'll start to conclude. Ultimately, the best way to combat the impact of these bank closures would be to develop a publicly supported community bank network along the lines of the German community banking model. But in the interim, an urgent summit of all the UK retail banks should be pursued to discuss their plans regarding their branch networks. For too long, the approach undertaken has been quite reactive, waiting for decisions and then allowing them to happen. If we continue in the same way, be in no doubt our communities will be starved of essential services, announcement by devastating announcement. We must take the initiative so we can prevent further closures. This could be secured by strengthening the access to banking protocol, introducing greater requirements on banks to abide by their responsibilities to the communities that have long supported them. Arranging a summit of all the major banks would also be an opportunity for the government to facilitate greater efforts to maintain an equivalent level of banking service in rural areas. Why not pursue, as the Honourable Lady mentioned, greater cooperation, perhaps even the establishment of banking hubs, where existing high street banks can co-locate, rather than completely vacate rural towns? The Minister before Christmas referred to action he has taken to raise awareness of the services in the Post Office. Why not pursue this avenue further and build a proper community bank on the existing infrastructure of the Post Office? This would, of course, entail a significant amount of initial investment, for not every post office is currently configured to undertake such functions, and staff are certainly not adequately resourced. However, increasing banking provision in local post offices could offer one way of ensuring that communities and businesses in rural areas continue to be able to access essential banking services. But a lot needs to be done if it is to work, and urgently at that.